Peter, one of the most interesting aspects of this study is that you don't stop at a point where perhaps many such studies do stop, which is to say, a criticism of the openness of the curriculum and its studied refusal to prescribe for students what they ought to know, what an educated human being ought to know, field by field. You go on to make some very interesting points about what it is that students at Bowdoin do learn, what is actually still required, as it were, of a Bowdoin man or a Bowdoin woman, even though it may not be written down anywhere. Sometimes it is written down. In your report, you conclude the following. Quote, what does Bowdoin want all students to learn? The importance of diversity, respect for difference, sustainability, the social construction of gender, the need to obtain consent, the common good, world citizenship, and critical thinking, unquote. Let's talk about that. You are yourself advocating diversity here. You're saying that conservatives and traditional scholarship on Western civilization and civilization in general have been pushed out of the curriculum and off campus. So what's the difference between good diversity and bad diversity? What is the diversity that reigns in place of good diversity, in your view, at Bowdoin?
The diversity that reigns is a doctrine in which individuals are reduced to the coordinates of their race, class, and gender. It is a severe form of sociologism, of deciding that people are no more than the coordinates with which they began their lives, and that fact takes precedence over all others. A good instance of that occurred in spring of 2011, where somebody scrawled a racial epithet on the door of a minority student. The student complained, and that prompted a protest. It's called the I Am Bowdoin rally, in which about 200 students marched into the main hall on campus, each wearing a piece of duct tape over his or her mouth. Mm-hmm. As they came in and formed a big circle, they stepped forward one by one, peeled back the duct tape, and would say things like, I am Hispanic and I am Bowdoin, I am lesbian and I am Bowdoin, or I am lesbian and Hispanic and I am Bowdoin. At the conclusion of this, we had an image of Bowdoin College in which the students had collectively self-identified themselves in a manner that only a diversophile could really comprehend. That the totality of Bowdoin is a collection of individuals, each of whom is willing to reduce himself to one of these tags. The notion of being an individual per se, of someone who has an ability to be there because he has a mind and a spirit of inquiry, just wasn't present. President Mills, by the way, attended that rally, and sometime after it said it was his proudest moment in the history of the college. The Diversity Doctrine...
Was his mouth taped?
No, his mouth was not taped.
If it had been, what would he have said?
He might have said...
When he whipped it off?
He might have said, I am an ally and I am Bowdoin. There are a few taglines that are available to those who don't meet one of the victim groups that have the prominence in the Diversity Doctrine. Now, you gave that list of things that one must know, and diversity and difference and
heads the list.
Heads that list. You also mentioned sustainability. I mentioned sustainability, which is a counter doctrine in some ways, in that the sustainability movement...
And this is something new. Sustainability's just come in the last, decade?
Yes, at Bowdoin, probably the date on which you can give it a certainty that it's there was 2006, when President Mills, I think it's 2006, signed the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, which puts the college on record as saying that the existence of global warming is an established fact that should take precedence over everything else, and now this needs to become the center of our education. Now, you can't have two centers, or I guess you could have an ellipse if you did, but the idea that social difference and diversity should be the abiding preoccupation of the college is in some tension with the idea that combating global warming and getting right with Mother Nature should be the center of the college. And the two things tend to pull apart upon racial lines.
Yeah.
The minority groups love the diversity doctrine for the benefits that it supposedly confers. The sustainability is much more appealing to white students. It doesn't require them to be perpetual martyrs
But
to
it's
the cause.
really amazing, isn't it, the sheer trendiness of that? Because, I mean, sustainability, you would think, if it were a substantive and meritorious idea, would be the subject of memos directed to buildings and grounds, not to the faculty and to the students, because you're not really asking them to use less energy, a la Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s, although maybe you are asking them to do that, but you're also asking them to sign on to a kind of political agenda, aren't you?
Right. The sustainability doctrine is not just about reducing carbon footprint, though it is that too. They take this as a call for social justice, as a call for a kind of socialist economics. They think that capitalism and free markets are part of what is degrading Earth and leading to our coming climate apocalypse. So there is a redemption doctrine in all this. Bad things are happening. They're happening because we're too addicted to free enterprise and too willing to let white males make decisions. So put the sustainability doctrine together with diversity, and you get a kind of picture of students as people who need to make many sacrifices in order to bring about this utopia.
So you have, at the one time, a kind of intellectual openness in the sense almost of relativism, that we can't tell you what's right and wrong or what's true or false. All values are relative, except for sustainability, diversity, world citizenship, and so forth.
Well, that word openness is a trap door that exists all over Bowdoin's campus. There are many, many contexts in which Bowdoin students and faculty members praise and prize openness, but at the same time, behind it, there is this hedged with taboos in every direction. Many different
And these things
subjects
penetrate, you might say, private life as well as time in the classroom.
Oh, yes.
And so, I mean, to be a good Bowdoin person is to embrace all of these things, to believe in all of these things, and think that, as you say, they offer redemption. But what briefly is going on outside the classroom? What is student life like, and what are students like under the new Bowdoin?
Well, I think when one looks at student life, the element that stands out as most salient is the invasion of the idea of student autonomy that shows up in the curriculum in other aspects of life. Bowdoin doesn't have any required courses, but for students who first arrive on campus, there is a required new student orientation, and as part of that, the students must attend a play titled Speak About It. Speak About It is sponsored by the Dean of Students' office, but the play is enacted by upperclassmen, and it's essentially a pitch to join the hookup culture. It consists of a series of skits in which students, male and male, male and female, female and female, come on stage and partly in conversation with each other, partly by soliloquy, talk about their robust sex lives and how great that is. After 40-some minutes of this, the play concludes with one of the characters stepping out of character, coming to the front of stage and saying something like this, that remember at Bowdoin, you can do whatever you want, with whomever you want, whenever you want. Just remember, as long as you do it, you need one thing, and then the cast all joins in and screams the one thing that's necessary. That one thing is consent. as long as someone agrees to do what you want to do, you're home free. Bowdoin backs this up by putting bowls of condoms in all the dormitories, basically on every floor, with signs on them saying "Help yourself." It's not a college that is concerned about promoting safe sex. It's a college that is concerned about promoting sex. And it does allow that some students may opt out of this, but most don't. The students each year do a survey of their own behavior. We know on pretty standard form year after year that about 75% of the students say they participate in hookup culture. Now, hooking up is...
The question is phrased that way?
Yes,
Yeah.
they're asked that, and there's
It
very
really is,
little
it
mincing
really
of
is like
words
coming out
about
of
this.
Tom Wolfe, isn't it? I mean, this is "I am Charlotte Simmons."
I think it
In
really
reality.
even goes beyond Tom Wolfe's imagination on this. It leads to a deep unhappiness on the part of many students, especially the women students who, by their senior years, are writing plaintive letters in the Bowdoin student newspaper about how miserable they are, that they can't have any lasting relationships, and it would be nice if there were a dating culture, but there isn't. This is what we've got. The sense that sex has become simply something that students engage in as a pastime with no emotional content to it has become one of the shaping forces of student life.
And it's sort of a required course, not an elective.
Right. It is a required course in the sense that that play that plunges them into it from their first day on campus is the only actual requirement that the college will ever make on them. They have to attend this, and they have to know as they begin their college career that a robust sex life is part of the Bowdoin education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's remarkable.
So what else did they do? They drink fairly heavily, but the college tries to restrict their intake of hard alcohol. So basically ignoring state law, they will allow the students to drink as much beer as they want. They worry about what they call transports. Transports are when a student gets so sick and drunk that he has to be taken to the hospital. That's a bad thing, and they try to keep that number low. But as long as you don't end up in a transported state, the transports of alcohol are perfectly fine.
Drugs?
The drug culture appears to be relatively minor at Bowdoin, as far as we can tell. It's drinking and sex that predominate.
Rock and roll?
There's the regular bacchanalia of college life available. An interesting thing that we didn't expect that turned up is that though Bowdoin has a lot of sports and a lot of teams and a lot of athletes, it has very few spectators. Its sports games are sparsely populated.
Is that right? Yeah.
And that too seems to represent something about this hyper-individualistic culture. If I'm not doing it, I don't care who else is doing it. Seems to be the attitude there. The world of sports has also been inflected with these other concerns about diversity and sexuality. There's a big effort to make the athletes join in their affirmation that they are open to homosexuality, and there's a day in which they all wear yellow shirts to demonstrate their solidarity with the gay community. The hockey club, or the hockey team, which is their strongest sport, was stripped of its championship by the college a few years ago on the grounds that they had engaged in hazing. And hazing is another key term at Bowdoin. It doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. This isn't taking kids out and beating them up or making them do dangerous things. The definition of hazing at Bowdoin is something like inappropriate subordination. So
humiliation, in other words.
Not even any humiliation. No? One instance of hazing that we knew about in some detail was an upperclassman offered beer to an underclassman in a situation in which the underclassman took the beer, but someone else reported it, and that was viewed as unfair coercion.
You mean because even though it was freely accepted,
Right.
it was regarded as a coercive situation.
Right. So this notion of hazing, I think, fits into the other things as well. We want to see ourselves at Bowdoin as always and everywhere making unconstrained free choices. And anything that has this element of hierarchy to it, even the faint hierarchy of a sophomore giving a freshman a cup of beer, crosses some sort of trip line here. I said I approach this as an anthropologist, and one of the things that stands out to me is the sometimes true strangeness of the tribe.
Yes, right.
It doesn't fit with one's notions of what college life must be
So if an
like.
upperclassman had given an underclassman a condom, would that be hazing?
A good conceptual problem, I don't know. That could have been, as long as it was consent, probably that would be okay.